Hello, everyone. All right. We're almost live, I think. Waiting for the streams to catch up here. Make sure everything's working properly. Hello, everyone. Okay. All right. So, David, you can see me. Can you hear me? Is everything good? And you can hear me. Awesome. Okay. So, wow, people from all over the place. I saw Nova Scotia in there. I love Nova Scotia. I saw David Huffstadter. Thanks for coming, dude. Nice to virtually see you. People from all over the place. We're going to actually go live, like live, well, we're live, but we'll actually start the webinar in a few minutes here as I kind of see everyone come in. Rick Williams, hey man, nice to see you. Kansas City, I've been to Kansas City. Santa Fe, haven't made it to Santa Fe yet, but I've been close. Surprise, Arizona. Been through Colorado Springs, I think. All right. So, hopefully, everyone can hear and see me just fine. And as the slide says up there, if you have any issues throughout the webinar, maybe try checking your audio devices. You may have to restart your browser or your device. And excuse me while I get organized here. So, all right, Boston. I used to live in Cambridge for like 12 years or something like that. Land of the clouds in Michigan. Sorry to hear that, Chris. San Diego, been there. Been to Knoxville. All right, where are we? We've got 141 people on so far. Let's see the stream. How's the stream doing? It says excellent. This is my first YouTube live stream on my own channel, so I'm getting used to everything. I think I saw someone say they were in Lubeck last summer. Oh, cabin in Lubeck. Oh, cool. Holden, hey, Old Orchard Beach. All right, we got some Mainers in the house, fellow maniacs. Panama City, Florida. All right, nice and warm down there, I suppose. So I have to pretend to be future Adam for a moment here. For everyone who is watching this on the replay, you're probably going to sit through a few minutes of me just kind of chatting with people at the beginning here, but you can fast forward a bit. There may be a chapter marker down in the description that you can click on to get towards the real show, I guess you could call it. So, oh man, we still got Dallas, Texas. I've been to Dallas a couple times. Tulsa, Kearney, Nebraska. I haven't been to Nebraska yet. Braintree. Oh yeah, I know Braintree. Do they still have the F1 Boston thing down there? That was pretty fun. Warmer tomorrow than in Maine than in New Orleans. Huh? That's interesting. Falmouth. All right. So what time is it? We've got 7:01 here, and 254 people are in now. Well, that went up a lot, I think. Or maybe I wasn't remembering. All right. Lowell, Massachusetts. Yeah. Hey, Richard. Nice to see you, man. Oh, thank you, Michael. I'm glad you liked the book. Yeah, that was a lot of work getting that thing out. I'm glad people are liking the book. Ohio. Hey, Vassalboro, Maine. All right. Let's see. 266. Okay, so it's rising fast here. I don't want to get deep into this before we get some people in here. So give it a few more seconds. John, thank you. Waterville, Maine. Oh yeah. Wisconsin. All right. So, tell me what your experience is with night photography, everybody. Like, have you been out to shoot the Milky Way? Have you done panoramas before? Is this all new to you? Like, kind of where are you with your experiences? Ooh, Huntsville. Naples, Florida. Medford Lakes, New Jersey. Two years with Milky Way, 3 panos. Been shooting Milky Way 2 or 3 years. All new to me. Never done night panorama. Nest Milky Way no panos. How would you rank Acadia for photography? Lots of responses coming in. So a lot of people who have done night photography, a lot of people who haven't done night photography. It's kind of all over the place, I guess. Some people panoramas are new. Milky Way's a dear friend. So we've got people with all kinds of different experiences here. So and yeah, great. So throughout the webinar, you can feel free to ask questions, but I may wait until the end to kind of get to those. I've done it both ways, answering them during the webinar and waiting to the end. And depending on how many questions come in, the webinar can take like twice as long if I answer everything as I go. And sometimes the questions are answered later in the webinar. So cool. We've got people from all different experience levels. And we're up to 312 viewers right now. Okay, so actually dropping down to 310, so we can probably get going. If it's going down, I guess we can go. And let me know throughout this. Maybe David, you can text me if my audio gets messed up, like if I get too close to the mic and it starts clipping or something like that. So let's see. All right. Change my slides here. Turn that off. Okay. Gonna move this over here. Bear with me, folks, as I learning the ropes here with the live stream stuff. Okay. Okay, and to answer the question I'm probably going to get asked, it's a YouTube live stream, so anything that streams live on YouTube is recorded. Whether or not it's public and available to you, it depends on what the person does with it. But for me, this will be recorded in here forever. It'll be the same link so that you can go back to the same link that you used to get here in the first place. After the webinar is over, and you'll be able to watch it. And you can immediately watch it, like as soon as the webinar is over. I think it's available to replay pretty soon after it's over. YouTube is pretty good like that. So without further ado, let me get my keynote presentation up here. And Yeah, so like I said, welcome to my first YouTube live stream. I've done a well, on my own channel. I've done one on the PhotoPills channel. Some of you may have seen me there with Raphael Pons. That was maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, something like that. Excuse me. That was actually, this talk actually was Milky Way Panoramas. So if you've seen that talk, you might sleep through this one. Sorry, but updated slightly, but that's pretty similar. So, but this is my first live stream on my own channel, so like I said, bear with me if I like kind of get confused as I'm working through the stream. So, and like I said, the replay link, same as this one, and it'll be emailed again to you later as well if you're on the mailing list and got here through the mailing list. All right, so I know you probably all know, if you're here, you probably know a little bit about me because most of you are from the mailing list, but I know some of you are from, from Facebook who didn't know me at all. But a little bit about me and, why you might want to listen to what I have to say. Just all these different people on the internet talking about everything these days. So I've been doing Milky Way photography for quite a while, since 2011 or 12, something like that. It's about 10 years, which doesn't sound like a lot, but in terms of Milky Way photography, that's kind of like the entire history of it as far as digital camera Milky Way photography goes. Not entirely. There's certainly people were doing it years before that, but it didn't really get popular until, like super popular until maybe 5 to 8 years ago or something like that. So I've been doing it for a long time. Back in 2015 or something like that, maybe even earlier, I wrote one of the original tutorials on landscape astrophotography that was printed in Outdoor Photographer, and a very similar article was on luminouslandscape.com back in the day. And I've since then written a number of articles for Digital Photo, Digital Photo Review, dpreview.com, written with Nikon, and more other outdoor photographer articles. You may have seen me on some or heard me on some podcasts like F-Stop, Collaborate, and Listen. I've been on that, and David Johnston's podcast. I've spoken on the Nikon School Theater stage at the Nikon booth in the Photo Plus and CES expos a couple times in the past. And I produce video tutorials and teach workshops occasionally on landscape astrophotography. Some of you may have my Milky Way Masterclass. That's a good compliment to the book that some of you have. I have a book. It's called Night Sky Photography, From First Principles to Professional Results. A bit of a mouthful, but that was what the publisher came up with for the title. I didn't get to choose the title. It's available basically anywhere you can buy a book. You could probably buy this. They may have to special order it. Amazon will certainly have it. They're always going to have the cheapest price, most likely. I really recommend the paperback over the ebook. The ebook is available and maybe a little cheaper, but the paperback looks about 1,000 times better than the ebook. The ebook is just kind of like, white background, black text, and kind of tiny photos here and there. But the book is just gorgeously laid out, which I actually have one somewhere. And I'm saying it's like I had nothing to do with the actual layout. I gave them, the materials, and they put it together. And then when I saw it, I was like, wow, that came out pretty well. So, here's an example, if I can get it on the screen, of what's in the book for the pictures. And we go get something more up here. Anyway, check it out if you're interested. Okay, and thanks to my friend John Secord for the photo of the book in the slide here. He took a nice photo of the book on a desk or table with a camera and a headlamp, and I really appreciate him taking that photo for me. Okay, so like I said, some of you may have my premium training, the Milky Way Masterclass. If you have it, let me know in the chat. I'm always curious to know. I know some people on the webinar have the old one. Some people have the new one, and a lot of people on the webinar I don't think have it at all. But it was updated a year ago. So if you have the one if you bought it before December or January of a year ago, then you have the old version. It's been updated since then. At least the editing class has been updated since then. Okay, let's get to the panoramas. So we're going to discuss a whole lot about panoramas, different types of panoramas. We'll talk about Panorama Gear, camera settings, a little bit about planning, and a little bit about stitching and software. We'll talk about the software side of it, but we don't have time to get into like a whole editing demo. That would be like another hour or something like that. But I do have some premium training that has a quick demo of Lightroom and using PT GUI, which is like the mother of all stitching programs to do Milky Way stitching. Sorry, I had to move some windows around for a second. We'll talk about that later, though. So, okay, why panoramas? Well, hopefully it's obvious. They're just fun. They're fun to look at. They're pretty. And you can capture the entire arc of the Milky Way through the sky. And if the Milky Way is high enough, you might even be able to get the Andromeda Galaxy towards the sort of opposite end of the Milky Way from where the core usually is. And some other nebulas that you don't really capture normally. I don't think you can see my mouse in this share. Yeah, but anyways, there's some pink spots, magenta spots in the sky there that are other nebulae that are visible when you do a panorama, but depends how high in the sky the Milky Way is, too, how much of this detail you'll get. We're talking about stitched panoramas, to make it really clear. We're talking about stitched panoramas. And hang on a sec, I gotta move some windows around again. So just to make it clear that we're talking about stitched panoramas, not cropping your photo to panorama. So this is where you literally take a bunch of different photos, panning the camera between each one, and then you stitch it together in software to make a single image that has a huge field of view. So that's very different from a an image cropped to a panoramic aspect ratio, where you just take a single image and then just crop the top and bottom or whatever to make it look panoramic. Not that those photos aren't beautiful, of course, but we're talking about capturing the full arc of the Milky Way most of the time. And hey, Patrick Bigos, or Bigos, I'm sorry, man, I always forget that part. But good to see you. Hope you're doing well, man. And of course, horizontal panoramas are like the most popular. Certainly, it's the way you can get the full arc of the Milky Way. And that's while normally you're going for the full arc of the Milky Way, you could do a horizontal panorama even when the Milky Way is way too high to get an arc in a single row. And you could just get the Milky Way going up into the sky, like in this photo here. And actually, if you look on the left side of the photo with where the trees are, you can kind of barely make out another thicker cluster of stars kind of coming down into the trees, and that's the other end of the Milky Way. So if you were there standing there in person, you'd see it arc up into the sky and come back down. So while I focus mainly on doing panoramas that capture the arc of the Milky Way because it's just more fun, but there's no reason you can't do panoramas any time of the year at the night sky, right? With the night sky. Of course, there are also vertical panoramas, something I don't do too much, but it is possible to do. Pardon me a moment. So a vertical panorama is when you are shooting top to bottom or bottom to top instead of left to right, and you're capturing a very tall vertical scene as opposed to a horizontal scene, and you can use that to capture the Milky Way going way up into the sky as well. When the Milky Way is angled higher into the sky, you could use a vertical panorama. Now, I haven't done it very much, but it is possible. Here's another example of vertical panorama. This is actually a bit different than most of my panoramas. This is a 50 millimeter lens. So I'm getting a much tighter view of the night sky. Excuse me, a lot more detail. And doing a vertical panorama, just panning the camera up, down, or bound up, whichever way I did it, and then stitching that together. It's not my best panorama, but it's an example of a vertical panorama. So you could do a panorama with a higher focal length to get more detail. And you'd want to use a wide angle lens to like get more area covered, you know. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the types of panoramas and just kind of some ideas. We'll get into camera settings and stuff in a bit, and camera hardware in a bit. But I want to go through some just pictures and talk about them for a little bit. This is a panorama with the lighthouse here, West Quoddy Head Lighthouse. And this was on a night with a lot of air glow, so that's why the sky is like very green like that. Normal phenomenon that happens in the sky quite often is the sky will have just this green color to it sometimes from air glow. Sometimes it's magenta, sometimes it's yellow or blue maybe. So there are, you know, think about different foregrounds for your panoramas, right? I live in Maine, so lighthouses are a common scene here for night photography of any sort, including panoramas. But if you're out west, then of course rock sculptures, rocks in a desert. What I'm trying to say, arches, things like that, canyons, whatever is out there, mountains, ponds, lakes. This is a bridge that goes to Deer Island, Maine. This is a breakwater that goes out to the Rockland Breakwater Lighthouse in Maine. And I put this in here because I wanted to show you guys just something to remember is the scene that you're capturing is going to be warped from, you know, 3D space into a 2D flat image. So if you're capturing 180 degrees or more of the scene for the Milky Way, it's going to have to squish that into a flat 2D scene and to be you know, visible on your monitor. So this breakwater in this photo is completely straight. It's like straight as an arrow. You walk from one end to the other. But because I'm taking such a huge field of view and wrapping it into a 2D image, it has to squish it and warp it so that you can see the whole the jetty, but it's going to look like it's a horseshoe shape. So that's one thing to remember when you're shooting at places that have defined you know, foregrounds, lines, jetties, piers. You know, a beach that's straight will actually look curved when you do a panorama with it. Here's another example of a straight, like I said, just a straight beach here, but it looks curved in the panorama here because of the wrapping, you know, the warping the 3D space into a 2D image, right? This is also a multi-row panorama, where I took not just one row, but I think this was 3 rows from top to bottom. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Do I have the slides here? Yeah, actually. So you can see, we'll get into the details of how to actually take panoramas and everything later, but just to let you know, there are multi-row panoramas is a possibility. So, and that's literally just panning the camera across and then up and then down and doing the same thing, you know, and stitching it together to capture the whole scene. So that's why I had to do it, because the Milky Way was so high that night that a single row wouldn't capture the arc of the Milky Way. So the Milky Way, if you want an arc in a single row, it's going to be in the northern hemisphere. That's going to be earlier in the year. In the southern hemisphere, I think it's most of the year you can almost get it. We'll talk more about planning later, but we're coming up on Milky Way season here in the northern hemisphere. Next month it'll start, but it'll be like really, really early in the morning and be visible for like not much time at all. So it's kind of like March, April. It gets really into it. And it's panorama season, I would say, in the northern hemisphere until about June or so. And as the year goes on, it's like earlier and earlier in the night that you can see the Milky Way. And later on, you want to, or you'll have to take your panoramas like earlier and earlier in the night, because the Milky Way will get straighter and straighter and higher in the sky as the year goes on. And as the night goes on, like in June, the Milky Way will be like straight up, you know, much earlier in the night than it was in like May or April. So Moving on, multi-row panoramas. Just another example of a multi-row panorama capturing a huge arc of the Milky Way when it's high in the sky and in a lot of the foreground. Twilight. Don't forget that you can shoot during twilight with the night sky, with the Milky Way. You might not get all the detail that you would get in pitch black night, because the twilight sky is going to be kind of blue. It'll have a whole lot less detail, of course, because it just won't have the... it'll be lit up a little bit from the rising or setting sun, depending on which side of twilight you're on. But early in twilight, or deep into twilight, depending on which way you're coming at it, you can still get a lot of detail with the Milky Way and still get that nice blue sky. Late or early into twilight, like when it's lighter out, you'll get way less detail, but it'll still be like a really pretty image. So it's just one thing to consider. You can always use it. Use that. So someone's asking about how do you keep the image so clear at ISO 12800. So I didn't do any stacking. I don't use star stacking for panoramas just because of the added pain in the ass that would be. But it's just, the camera just handles 12,800, no problem. Also, you're on a webinar and a YouTube, like you can't actually see all the detail and the noise here. Like the image has noise for sure. It just doesn't look like that on the YouTube screen. But I would never use 12,800. That was just like a bad idea at the time. I mean, it was fine, but like there's no reason to use that ISO. Probably never need to go above 6,400 or something like that. Also consider, as crazy as it sounds, you can shoot in moonlight sometimes. You're going to get obviously way less detail in the night sky. But I went out one night at a river here in Maine and had the moon was like half full behind me, up pretty high in the sky, maybe 45 degrees or something like that. So it was lighting up the landscape, and the sky, of course, was washed out a bit, but he still got detail. I still worked. I still had detail. And you can also, of course, use buildings wherever you are. You may have old farmhouses or ghost towns out west, lighthouses, whatever you have. This is an old Coast Guard station at low tide. This is West Quoddy Head Lighthouse in the winter last year, with some ugly tramped on snow. This is a lighthouse up in Newfoundland, Canada. And the scene here looks kind of funny because like the lighthouse is kind of tucked up on this hill, so it looks kind of tiny and like dainty and ornamental. But it's not a big lighthouse in person, but it looks a lot tinier in this photo than it actually is. And then on the right, you've got an outhouse, probably the most scenic outhouse I've ever encountered. And of course, this was late in the year, so the Milky Way is going straight up into the sky. So even though it's a panorama, there was no arc to the Milky Way, and I didn't even try a multi-row. Like I wasn't interested in that. This was the photo I wanted to capture. So just remember, it's not always about the arc of the Milky Way. You can use panoramas to capture whatever scene you want to capture. It doesn't have to be the full arc. And you can always try a different, composition, get low to the ground. Maybe you'll see something different. You can get, in this example, I got more of the rocks kind of like in your face in the photo. Of course, that means that the lower you are to the ground, the more out of focus everything will be when you're focused for the stars. So you're probably going to have to do focus stacking. And you're talking about panoramas, so focus stacking means taking a whole bunch of images and focus stacking and changing focus and doing it again and again and again. So it gets complicated, a lot of work. I do that all the time with regular images that are not panoramas, where I'm not moving the camera. But when you get into panoramas where you got 10, 12 shots or something, 10, 12 pans to get the shot, it gets to be a lot of work. So sometimes I cut corners, so I'm not there until daylight. All right, so let's talk about camera gear. And Kathy, I don't know what you mean by little green orbs in some of the pictures. Just about any modern digital camera will work great for this. 10 years ago was a different story, but cameras have come a long ways in 10 years. And I have had clients on workshops come through with, just about everything from Fuji and whatever micro Four Thirds cameras with Olympus and etc. up to APS-C and full frame. I don't think I've had medium format, but you can use like anything. pretty much these days. I mean, there's even phones that can take shots of the Milky Way, for crying out loud, now, because the shutter can stay open so long. Not great photos, but it's possible. Full frame is going to be better, but, don't worry about it, right? Just whatever you have might work, unless it's a 10-year-old camera. And I'm curious to know what people have for cameras. Let me know in the chat there so I can see what kind of cameras you guys are using. It's got some Canons, some Nikons. Yep. And for lenses, yeah, same thing. Let me know what lenses you're using. So for general Milky Way photography, it's really common to use really wide-angle lenses. 14 to 16 millimeters or so, or 20 millimeters. That's pretty high, but on a full-frame camera, maybe 10 to 12 millimeters on a crop camera. Even smaller millimeters if you're using a Micro Four Thirds camera. I guess that would be like 5 to 8 millimeters or something like that, 5 to 7. So especially for non-panoramas, the wider angle lens, you're going to get way more of the sky in a single shot, right? So that's why a 14 millimeter is so popular with night photography on a full frame, so like a 10 to 12 on a crop camera. But for panoramas, it's also still beneficial to have like a really wide angle view of the sky, so you can get a ton of the sky and foreground in when you do your panning in every single shot. So you don't have to take so many gosh darn photos. The wider the lens, the more you'll see in a single frame, the less frames you have to take for the panorama. That doesn't mean you can't use a wider angle, a narrower lens. You just get a different view, or you may need more rows. So I'll talk more about lenses in a second, but also don't forget to have a sturdy tripod. This is especially important when you're getting into, if you get like a multi-axis head or something and you've got all this crazy pano gear attached to your camera. But I always tell my students, who, especially the ones that show up like to a workshop with like, $5,000 of camera gear and like a $50 tripod or $100 tripod that like is really flimsy. If you're going to have thousands of dollars of camera gear on a set of sticks, you better have a good set of sticks. Like, don't cheap out on your tripod legs. Especially for long exposures like this, even 10 seconds is a long exposure, right? And sometimes you're doing a minute or 2 or 10 or 20 at night. So don't use a cheap tripod. Do yourself a favor. Save yourself $1,000 by buying a $1,000 tripod the first time. Otherwise, you're going to be upgrading, tripods and one after the other, like the way I did when I first got into photography years ago. And we're going to talk more about panorama-specific gear a little later on. Excuse me a moment. All right, so for lenses, like I said, let me know. It looks like people are already typing that in the chat, but let me know what you've got. These are just some examples, okay? I can't keep up with every single lens that comes on the market. I certainly don't test them all. I only have experience with Nikon lenses, maybe some Sigma lenses once in a while. And I kind of know about some of the lenses that come through my workshops, of course. But a personal on-hands experience, I only really know about the lenses I have. And currently I'm shooting with a Z6 or a Z7. Just depending on my mood, I guess. I usually use a Z7 at night. It's lower megapixel, but it's got less noise because the pixels are bigger. And for stacking and panoramas and stuff like that, the files are smaller, so it's just a lot faster to work with on the computer. And the image, like, you're not hardly going to know the difference between the 24 megapixel Z6 versus like the 45 megapixel Z7 and the night images, because even they're still noisy anyway. I mean, they're using the techniques I do, they're pretty clean, but they're still going to have some noise in them. They're night photos. So I usually use the Z6 if I can remember to put it in my bag. And I use the Nikon Z 14 to 24 f2.8 lens. It's basically the new version of the old, 14 to 24 f2.8 lens that was for the f-mount Nikon cameras, which I used that with my D850 for a long time, and all the other Nikons I had before that, and I used it with the Z6 and 7 for a long time before the new one came out. Excuse me. All right, so, but I've used the Sigma 14 to 24 bit. That's also pretty good. The Rokinon 14 f2.8 is a really popular lens because it's so inexpensive. Like a few $100. You can get brand new. You can get it used for probably less. It's not the most, amazing perfect lens, but it works pretty well. You do have to be a little careful with the QA, the quality assurance on some of those lenses. Like sometimes they're shipped out of the factory and they don't quite focus right, or they're like soft on one side. Maybe it's improved over the years. I don't really know, but it used to be a real nightmare to try to get a good Rokinon. But I'm imagining that it's improved over the years. But just make sure you buy anything from a reputable place like B&H, Adorama, your local reputable camera store where you can test it out and return it if it's a bad lens. So those are just some of the lenses. Like I said, there's seems to be lenses coming out all the time. I don't have any of the IRIX lenses on here. One of those lenses, I can never remember which one it is, Lower IRIX or something like that, is absolutely garbage. It's like promoted as a night photography lens, but it's like total garbage. Like the stars look like flying birds. It's just awful. And it's so be careful out there. Do your own research. Look up star tests and stuff like that for lenses. Coma distortion test and stuff like that. All right, so let's talk a little bit about, just looking ahead here, about how this all works. So this panorama here at Portland Head Lighthouse in Maine was only about 6 shots, but sometimes I'll need 8 or 10. It just kind of depends on the scene, how high the Milky Way is in the sky. I actually, as you can see in this photo, I didn't even get the tail end of it on the left side of the image because it was just so much light pollution over there. I didn't even bother anyway. I probably took the photo, so it probably actually took more than 6 photos for this. But as you can see in the, I don't know if you can see it that well, but the top left image in the frames here, you just can't even see the detail of the Milky Way because there's just so much light pollution. So I kind of cropped it out anyways. So this was all at 14 millimeters, f2.8, 25 seconds. This was before I even did star stacking and stuff like that, and I was shooting 25 seconds. These days, I'd probably use 20 seconds just to keep the star trails even a little smaller. ISO 3200. Your ISO is going to need to vary depending on the scene. Like there's a lot of light here. I didn't need a high ISO, any higher than that anyway. Also, a question I get all the time, how is this going to work if the stars are moving? Will it stitch properly together? Yeah, it'll be fine. Unless you have the worst panoramic software in the world, everything should be fine. The movement between the stars, between the frames, like, you take a frame and then 30 seconds later or whatever, you're taking another shot after you've panned the camera a bit, etc., etc. Like, don't worry about it. It won't cause any issues at all. If it did, then we wouldn't be here talking about this, right? I wouldn't be able to take panoramas. So exposure settings. So there's this thing called star stacking that I briefly touched on earlier. And I use that when I'm not doing panoramas. And that's when you're taking a really short shutter speed, like at 14 millimeters, you could get away with 10 seconds usually, to get really short star trails, basically pinpoint stars. And then you take a whole bunch of shots, like 10, 20 to 40 or whatever, and you stack them together in software, and the software will align and average those photos to get really low noise and pinpoint stars, like the best of both worlds. You could do that with panoramas, but you're doing 10 or 20 shots with each pan, each frame that you need for the panorama. Sometimes you're taking 10 or 12 frames. And it's just a real pain because then you have to stack each one of those, and then you can blend them and stitch them. It's like, it takes forever. So I personally just haven't done it with panoramas, even though I do it all the time with my regular non-panorama shots. And it's mentioned in the book, if you have the book, or if you've seen my Milky Way Master crash course, or if you have the master class, you've seen this stuff, star stacking. But I avoid it with panoramas just because it's just so much more complicated. I sit in front of the computer enough as it is, doing the photography that I already do. And I'm pretty happy with the results that I get doing it the way I do, even though it's not. Like, it could be cleaner, I suppose, but I'm pretty happy with the results. Also, something that you'll notice when you're out shooting in the dark is that your foreground is going to be, like, invisible. Like, if there's not much light in the foreground, then, like, a 10 or 20 or 30-second shot for the stars, like, you're not going to see much in the foreground. Maybe there's a lot of light, ambient light, like at a lighthouse, or you're using lights yourself, like low-level lighting to light up the scene or something like that. But more often than not, where I'm shooting, there isn't a whole lot of light on the foreground. So I'll often have to take another set of frames, like a whole separate panorama, with a different shutter speed, a higher shutter speed, like a minute, 2 minutes, 4 minutes, something like that, to capture more light. So I'm taking one panorama for the stars at 10 to 20 seconds, 30 seconds, depending on the focal length. I'll talk more about that in a second. And then another panorama, the exact same frames, just at, a minute, 2 minutes, 4 minutes, something like that. And then you have these two separate panoramas that you then need to blend together. So you'd stitch them separately, and then you're going to blend them together in Photoshop. You could avoid all that and just do the sky panorama and just deal with it. Deal with the fact that your foreground is going to be dark, potentially, depending on where you are. And Donald's asking if I use star... No, I don't use a star tracker at all for anything other than my telescope. I don't find the star tracker to be useful in any way for Milky Way photography, for wide-angle Milky Way photography. You can get the same result with stacking, and there's no way I'm going to put a star tracker on and try to do a panorama. That's just a major pain in the ass. So I have no interest in doing that. So I don't use a star tracker for anything but a telescope. So depending on your focal length, the shutter speed is going to depend on your focal lengths, right? So at 14 millimeters in full frame, I'd say you can get away with like 20 seconds or so. You could go up to 30 if you want. You're going to have some longer star trails. If you are doing star stacking, you can get away with like 10 seconds because you're going to star stack and get lower noise. But I would do 20 seconds if I'm not star stacking. You can use the PhotoPills Spot Stars pill, the tool inside PhotoPills, to find the shutter speed for your camera and focal length combination. It'll give you different different values for like either really pinpoint stars or like barely visible star trails. So I would use the one for barely visible trails if I'm doing a panorama and I'm not star stacking. And that's how I come up with like 20 seconds or so. But it's also just through experience. You can also just take a 30-second shot, a 20-second shot, a 10-second shot, whatever, and just look at the preview on your camera and see what you like. So I'm usually doing 20 seconds, ISO 3200, 6400, depending on the scene. You should never really need to go above 6400. And the higher you go in the ISO, the only thing you're really doing is just blowing out more stars. If the image looks really dark, but your histogram looks okay, like it's not completely bunched up on the left side of your histogram, the histogram is pushed over and pulled away from that left side a bit, then you're probably okay, right? Even if it's really dark in the back of your screen. But there's other settings in your camera you need to be aware of. There's on Nikons, there's the picture control, I think it's called. There's something similar on Canons and most other cameras where there's a way to, set a look or feel for the JPEGs if you were shooting in JPEG mode, but like, vivid or landscape or portrait or monochrome or whatever, right? It's usually called stuff like that for the different settings. And while it's generally designed for just shooting JPEG mode, it is applied on most cameras to the JPEG preview that you see in your camera. So if you're using Vivid or something like that, then the preview you see in the back of your camera is going to be really like crushed with contrast, and the darks will be really dark, probably more than they actually are. So I use neutral or flat for the picture control mode or whatever it's called in your camera. You'll have to look it up, I guess. And that gives me a more realistic view of the image on the back of the screen. It's still not a perfect image because it's a JPEG. You can only zoom in so far, etc. But take mind of that and your histogram. And catch up on a couple things here. As they're training for how to use PhotoPills. Yeah, so PhotoPills, we'll talk about that later. PhotoPills.com has just infinite hours of training, as well as their YouTube channel. So you can learn everything about PhotoPills 6 ways to Sunday through all the free training that's out there. Now, if you enjoy my style of training, I do have a premium video that's available that's like a 2.5 hour tutorial on PhotoPills, and I talk about everything from sun and moon to Milky Way and like planning moon shots and how big the moon's going to be compared to a lighthouse a mile away, and augmented reality for planning stuff. But that's also all found on the PhotoPills website and their YouTube channel. But I do have my own copy because people my own premium training on it because I got enough people asking me about it that they wanted to see my take on it, I guess. So anyway, I'll talk. You'll see that later. So hopefully this is all making some amount of sense. So for the foreground, I'm usually, if I need to take a separate foreground shot because it's just really dark and I need a separate foreground shot to blend in later, I'm probably going to look at ISO 1600, maybe higher, maybe 3200, for 1 or 2 minutes, maybe 4, maybe 30 seconds. It just depends how much ambient light there is on the scene. To get a separate, basically take all the same frames again, just with a lower ISO and a longer shutter speed to get more light. And then you would blend those two together. Technique. So the camera, I'm going to go side by side here. Give me a second to figure out how to do this. And, aha. 1 second, folks. My thing got messed up. Video capture. Add existing, come on. And, all right, live in the moment video stream editing. How about that? And I need to make that a little smaller still. Okay. All right. That was silly. All right. So I'm going side by side here so that I can show you my camera. So if you're doing a sort of left to right, or right to left, whatever, but a horizontal panorama where you're capturing the Milky Way arcing across the sky, then you generally want to have your camera oriented vertically, the opposite way of the direction of the panorama. So you would do it like this, and then you're going to pan like this across the scene. But if you have fancy hardware, there's a rotator and a nodal rail and stuff that'll make it even easier to do this, but we'll get to that in a moment. So if you're doing a vertical panorama, you're probably going to want to have the camera horizontal, and then you would pan like that. And the reason you're doing this is that you're capturing more of the scene above and below in the vertical orientation, so that when you stitch it sideways like that, you'll have way more above and below you. You'll actually capture the Milky Way. If you don't do it like this for horizontal panorama, you're going to have to do a bunch of rows like this instead. So when the Milky Way is low enough in the sky, you can do it like that. All right, hope that makes sense. Also, L brackets. If you aren't familiar with L brackets, they're like a lifesaver. You can just put your camera right in your tripod head, right that. You don't have to flop the tripod head all the way over to the side. Like if it was on a tripod head like that, and you have to flop the tripod head over to the side to go vertical, then you're off center, the weight's wrong. It's not going to work for panning. It's going to be off center with the panning. So L brackets are your friend. Random side note. All right, so someone's asking about long exposure noise reduction. Long exposure noise reduction, if you set that in your camera, it works for RAW files. It's different than high ISO noise reduction, which is only for JPEG, so don't even bother with that. But long exposure noise reduction actually is a dark frame in your camera. Your camera, after it takes the exposure, will close the shutter and take the exact same exposure again with the same settings, find the hot pixels as best it can, and then map those hot pixels out of the final RAW file. Now, if I'm star stacking, I turn that off because the star stacking will get rid of that, and it's just an extra amount of time to wait between each photo. But if you're not star stacking, then having that on will help you get rid of hot pixels in the image. But it's up to you whether you want to use it or not. It's certainly useful for foreground images because the foreground will probably have a lot of hot pixels in it. And you got to either deal with it in camera by waiting between your shots with the dark frame, with the long exposure noise reduction, or deal with it in software. Capture One is a really good RAW editor that can get rid of a lot of hot pixels automatically with a little slider. But it's not perfect. And otherwise, you're going to have to sit there with the clone stamp tool or the spot healing brush tool or something like that to get rid of hot pixels. Okay. So also your tripod and your panning base must be level. Get back to the technique here. So I know there's a lot of questions coming in, by the way, and I'm missing a lot of them because I just want to get through a lot of the webinar here, but please feel free to copy your text and then paste it later on when we get to the Q&A section or something like that, or try to remember what you wrote, I guess. But if I miss you here, just, you can always ask it again later. So you have to have a level tripod. There's usually a spirit level or something that you can see in the top of your tripod maybe, and on your base. You want to try to get that as level as possible. Then you can level the camera on top of that. Your frame should overlap. A rule of thumb is 30%, 30% to 50%. 50% is probably overkill. You can usually get away with 30%. Sometimes you can get away with less. It depends on the stitching software. Some stitching software claims to be able to stitch without any overlap at all, but that's going to cause problems. I would always have some overlap. You're going to have a way use your time stitching with overlap. So I usually do about a third or so, third to 50%. And you can test and figure this out for what focal length you're using, right? You can just test it and test panoramas, right? Go shoot in your backyard and then stitch it in software and did it work? Or go down to the beach or go down to the local place you like to shoot and just kind of play around and figure it out before you're out under the stars doing a panorama for the first time. Because then you can't see anything, or you got to turn your light on all the time, or it's just harder to use your camera in the dark, or you're cold, or whatever. It's just really good to go out and test taking and shooting panoramas before you go out for real at night to do this. And then, especially when the Milky Way is only in the position for so long, and then you miss it, right? So, for example, on 14 millimeters on a full frame camera, I can pan 30 degrees. That's literally the number of degrees on the panning base that I look at between each frame. Works great for, I guess it's 50% overlap is what I have written here. It's been I just kind of do it by habit now. And don't forget that you'll need extra frames at the beginning and end of the panorama. So the beginning and end of the panorama, you want an extra frame or two, at least one. So if let's say your panorama, the Milky Way starts here and ends here, you don't want just that much in your panorama. You want to take another frame on either side of that. If you don't do that, you're going to end up without enough room to crop. Take it from me, I know personally, but you want extra room. So I always end up taking at least an extra frame on either side, probably often more than that. And then I'll often end up only using, 2/3 of what I photographed, or what of the frames that I actually took. But you always need extra frames on either side, so don't be skimpy with the frames. All right, let's go back to the old. There we go. All right, so exposure blending. I mentioned exposure blending a little bit earlier. So this is where you have a scene like this. Let me go back a second. So, in the photo, obviously, you can see detail in the sky, you can see detail in the foreground. But actually standing there in the dark, for anyone who's standing on the coast of Maine, that's a dark area, you know that you can't see a ton right in front of your face under the dark night sky. So a 20-second shot that I was using at 14 millimeters or something like that, it's not going to capture much detail in the foreground. So if I go up to this one, you can see the sky panorama images on the top. You can see detail in the sky in each of those images, but the foreground is basically pitch black. It's not quite that bad in the real images. It's just the way it shows up in the webinar here. But it's basically useless. There's almost no data there. But at the bottom of the screen here, you'll see another row, another set of images for the same framing panorama, but they're 2 minutes each. Each exposure is 2 minutes each, and at ISO 4000. Why did I use 4000? I don't know. I could use 3200. I could probably use 1600. And that goes into a whole nother conversation about how cameras work and why ISO doesn't matter most of the time, which some of you probably have heard that by now with what they call ISO invariance and stuff like that. Anyway, and it's explained in the book. So if you have the book, there's like a whole chapter on how camera sensors work and ISO and sensor noise and stuff like that. So you see the problem here is that the sky image at like 20 seconds doesn't have enough detail in the foreground. The foreground image at 2 minutes has way too much, like the sky isn't necessarily always blown out, but it's pretty darn close if it isn't. But the trails, of course, the star trails are going to be crazy, like hot dogs, right, for 2 minutes. You can't really see that here in these teeny little photos, but so you have to take these two, sets of images and create two separate panoramas. So here we have what the panoramas look like after they're blended without cropping. So you can see the bumps and everything from just how they get stitched together after the lens warping is added and all that stuff. And then you would take these two panoramas, and at this point, now that the stitching of the panoramas is done, this is basically like just exposure blending like any other way, right? Like if you're going out and doing a non-panoramic image, and you're taking your shot for the sky and your shot for the foreground, and you're going to blend those, this is the same thing. There's no difference. The only challenge is that the stitching software might not have gotten the panorama perfectly lined up between the sky panorama. The horizon and whatever might stitch together a little differently than the horizon and the foreground panorama. So then the blending it becomes more complicated. You start using like the clone stamp tool and all that kind of stuff to and warping and whatever to kind of get things going. But at any rate, you can use exposure blending for this. You take two separate panoramas basically, and then you can blend them together to create a final image like this. So yeah, it's extra work. You could get around it with light painting. I don't like light painting or low-level lighting. I don't really like carrying around lights and dealing with that, but to each their own. Just be careful where you are. I think some national parks have rules against using lights at night. And also, if you're out at Acadia or someplace that's really popular like that, your lighting might ruin the shot for the people down the coast from you or something like that. So just be careful when you're using lights. All right, so let's talk about hardware. So we talked about cameras a bit and lenses, but there's actually hardware specific to panoramas that you can choose to use. You don't have to. But the one that is the most important if you are going to use any of this stuff is the Nodal Rail, or a Nodal slide. It goes by both names. Now, what this does is it corrects parallax, and it makes stitching easier in the software and more likely to work. So what the heck is parallax? Parallax is the difference in apparent position of an object along different lines of sight. This is usually noticed through something in the foreground compared to an object in the background. You pan the camera left or right, and they don't line up anymore. And this is like the finger illusion example. Like if you put your finger in front of your face, try to get it in frame here, and then you close one eye, and then you switch eyes, and the finger looks like it's dancing back and forth. That's parallax, because you're looking at it with one eye and then looking at another eye, and they're in two different spots. So the lineup is different. So your camera has the same problem. It's one eye. And if you have, as you can see, like in this example here, the tripod and the birch tree in the distance line up on the left image, but then when I pan the camera to the right, the tripod and the birch tree don't line up anymore. That's the parallax. So you need to correct that, and you can not worry about it and just let the stitching software try to deal with it. But if you've got a really strong elements in the foreground or the background, like the pier, or not the pier, the jetty I was on with all the rocks, like that might have been a real nightmare to stitch without a Nodal Rail. So these are fairly inexpensive. I don't really know like the price. You can probably get cheaper ones for under $50 or something like that. And of course, you can probably spend hundreds of dollars on some of them too. And the one you'll need for your lens is going to depend on the manufacturer and their focal length and all that. So try to look it up with the manufacturer. Really write stuff. Make some Fanotech, Nodal Ninja, Sunway Photo. Lots of companies make Nodal Rails. Acrotech. So there's usually a table or something you can look up to figure out which one you need for your lens. Because if it's too long, it'll show up in the frame. It'll be sticking into your frame. If it's too short, you won't be able to correct for parallax enough. And the way you correct for parallax is actually by pushing you put the rail on the bottom of the camera, and then you push the camera back and forth in the shoe on your tripod, and then you've got that's how you correct for parallax. You basically push it forward or back, and you pan the camera left and right, and you keep doing this until those two objects, foreground and background, like the tripod and the tree that I was showing you, line up throughout the panning. So you just kind of hit and miss with it. You go forward a bit, does it work? Okay, no, going backwards. Then you find a sweet spot, and you can write it down and mark it for that lens. And yeah, so we've got, you line up two objects close and far. We'll just go over this. Center them with your camera level, and then pan far right or far left, but in this example we're going far right, keeping the objects in the frame, and then slide the nodal rail back and forth in the tripod head until the objects line up again. So you can see here, after sliding it, the tree and tripod line up again. See, they're not aligned initially, and then I slid the rail, and then they're lined up. And then you go the other way, pan all the way left or whatever, and then adjust it again. Make sure that it stays perfect throughout, your whole range of movement there. And then you'd lock it down, and you can write down and take a note of the markings of where it is in the nodal rail and all that for that lens and for that focal length. If it's a zoom lens, and you're going to use different focal lengths, make sure you're set to the focal length you want to use to get the reading. And then you could always change to a different focal length and take another reading. For prime lenses, it's only going to need to be done once. But if you change nodal rails, like brands or something like that, you're going to have to try it again because they may fit differently in the shoe, and the markings might be different. So like I said, available from various manufacturers. Check the recommended length for your focal length. My favorite piece of hardware, now the nodal rail I consider like essential just because it makes stitching a lot easier. But my favorite piece of Panorama hardware is the rotator with click stops. Which there's only two in existence that I know of, or at least two companies that make them with different models. Fanotech and Sunway Photo. And what this is basically a thing that sits on top of your tripod, between your tripod and your nodal rail. And it has these little like screw things in it where you can adjust how many degrees the camera will pan as you turn it. And with the ones with click stops, you basically set it so that when you pan, it just moves and then clicks and stops into the next increment. So for example, I have mine set for 30 degrees. So every time I push the head to pan it, it goes to the next 30 degree mark and kind of seats into there with these ball bearings. At the time that I bought my rotator, it was only Fanotech that was making them, I think, that had click stops. Really Right Stuff makes them, but as far as I know, they don't have click stops. Sunway Photo makes a couple models. There's the one listed here that has click stops. The Fanotech is higher quality, but I have a friend who has the Sunway Photo, and it works well. The great thing about this is, you don't have to look at your head and then go, all right, I need to go 30 degrees, so I got to look and watch, and then, okay, now I'm 30 degrees. Now I can take a photo. You don't have to do that. You just push it, and it goes to the next increment. And you don't need to turn your headlamp on. So you can do this in the dark real easily. It just makes it so much easier. It's a little piece of hardware. It just makes taking panoramas so much easier. So this is another photo of that rotator that I have, click stops. This is the Nodal Ninja RD16-2 on the right. And on the left is just the Nodal Ninja nodal slide that I happen to have, but you can get many different models from all over the place. And like I said, Sunway Photo makes a few models. The one shown here is the DDP64M, but do your own research, look out and see what's available. Someone mentioned there's a FLM brand. I don't even know what FLM is, but these things are getting more popular, so more and more brands will start making them. Maybe even Really Right Stuff one day will put one with we'll put click stops into theirs. So I have this slide I call gear layering, where we talk about all the details or all the things to go into my kit for panoramas. Now, you could just say, screw it all, I'm not going to deal with all that extra hardware, and just use your ball head and your tripod and just just pan it any old way you want, and then hope that the stitching software works. And it might work, especially if you're using really good stitching software like PTGUI. But you're going to have a better chance of success if you have some good hardware like the Nodal Rail, and you get your tripod set up properly, and then the rotator just makes things easier. So the sort of layering, stacking that I have here, the rotator is the thing with the blue knobs in it, kind of in the middle. Right below that, there's something, you might be able to see the words "Really Right Stuff" on what is basically a dovetail plate that sits on the bottom of the rotator, and it has a dovetail that clamps into a Arca Swiss compatible ball head, like this Really Right Stuff ball head. So that rotator, so they've got the dovetail plate that's screwed into the bottom of the rotator. The rotator on top has a QRC55 clamp from Fanotec. You don't have to use that exact one. It's just the one that came with my kit and works with my Nodal Rail. On top of that, the Nodal Rail I'm using is the MFR 210 rail. It's just the one that came with the what do you call it? Kit I bought, the multi-row kit that I'll mention in a second. And the clamp that the camera is actually attached to is the QRC40A clamp on top of the rail. Now, these are all just the ones I have. If you're going out and you want to get the Nodal Ninja stuff, which is like Fanotec and Nodal Ninja, they're the same thing. Fanotec makes the Nodal Ninja brand or whatever. So this is just what I use. You don't have to use this stuff. It's just I had so many people asking me about the specific model numbers of some of the stuff, so I put it all here. So you can take a screenshot of this or go back and watch this later and get it if you're really, really interested. Glenn, yeah, imagine sticking a tracker into all this stuff. Yeah, and make it even more interesting. And that wouldn't even, it would be crazy. How do you pan a tracker? All right, so there's something called a multi-axis panorama head. Now, this is if, this makes it easy for doing multi-row panos if you want to get into that, but it's another expense, of course. But the whole idea here is that, you've got your camera, right? And by setting the no parallax point in the lens with that slide that goes in the bottom, get this over here more. You're hopefully setting it so that the camera will pan around the no parallax point in the lens, right? But if you then want to go up and down, you're not going around that point anymore. So if you have this 3-axis system, you can pan around that point up and down as well, side to side and up and down. So it makes it easier to do a multi-row thing, but it also keeps it rotating around that no parallax point. And the vertical rotator here on the left, that's like the camera is attached to with the rail, that rotator also has click stops in it. So you can do this completely in the dark, where you can pan and get your click stops, and then when you need to go up, you loosen it and then go up, I don't know, a couple clicks or whatever, tighten it, and then you're exactly where you need to be, right? So it's just really useful to have click stops. This kit you're looking at here in this photo is the Nodal Ninja M1L. It's just the one that happens to work with my lens. They have different kits available. There's different companies that make other kits that look very similar. When I bought this, it was the only one that had a rotator with click stops, but that was years ago, right? So, and this is only if you're really wanting to get to multi-row panos. You can still do multi-row panos without it. It just may not stitch as easily, and it may cause you headaches. So leveling is very important when you're out in the field doing this stuff. You want to level the tripod legs first so that the base is level, and just have patience. Try to get the legs, everything level. If it's kind of level, and then you start panning your head, just the shift in weight from one side to the other side of the pan could move the tripod legs just a tiny bit, and you could go out of level. And then you need to level the camera on top of all that stuff, right? So what I do is just I have my iPhone, I use a level app, like a bubble level app, and I put it on the rail, which is hard to show you without the rail, but if you're got the camera and let's pretend there's a rail coming out here, I would put the phone up on top of the rail, kind of like that. You can kind of see what I'm talking about, with a level app on it. And then I can just look at the level app and move the camera around until the level app says I'm level. It may not be perfect. It's a phone, not an actual level, but it works pretty well. And then you'd want to pan it, to do a test pan like left to right with the level there, and just kind of see if is it staying level. What do you need to fix? Maybe you need to fix your tripod legs. So once you get everything figured out, then hopefully you can pan left to right, or right to left, whatever, with it staying level and not going completely out of whack on you. And you can use. I also use the level in the camera as well, but the like the virtual horizon level. But getting the slide level is a little more reliable. With like put your phone on there and get your slide level. Because the tripod, the way the camera is mounted into the head, may be a little sloppy with the brackets and everything. I've had issues with that, so then I started using it on the Nodal slide with my phone. And Jerry's asking, is all this gear info in the book? Yes. I don't know that it's all spelled out with all the model numbers and everything, but all the panorama stuff is probably in the is in the book as well. Stitching and a little bit on stitching and the parallax and stuff like that. Okay. Whew, all right, planning. So this is all great, but how do you plan your shots, right? So the very basics are that single row panoramas, where you've got the Milky Way arcing from one side to the other, they're possible in the northern hemisphere until about June or so. By later than that and late in the night in June, the Milky Way is just too vertical in the sky to get it arcing across the horizon in a single row. You would have to go to multi-row, and then eventually it gets so vertical in the night that it's just, you'd have to do this crazy like 360-degree panorama or something like that. In the southern hemisphere, single rows are possible, I think, most of the year. At some point in the night, most of the year, the Milky Way is really close to the horizon, and then it's like a different spot in the sky. So check PhotoPills for where you are and find out, the actual elevation and all that. For single row panoramas, rule of thumb is that the max Milky Way elevation of about 45 degrees or so with a 14 millimeter lens and a full frame camera, or 10 or so millimeters on a like a crop camera, is about as high as you'd want to go with the Milky Way, about 45 degrees of elevation of the highest point of the Milky Way. So if the Milky Way is arcing across the sky, whatever the highest point is, as long as that's 45 degrees or lower in the sky, you're probably good to go for a single row. If it's much higher than that, you're probably out of luck for a single row to get the whole arc without doing a multi-row. So we're going to talk a little bit about the planning specifically for this photo here. That is the twilight photo that I took on top of Otter Cliffs in Acadia a few years back in winter when it was freezing cold, single digits, I think. Very cold morning to be doing that kind of stuff. So PhotoPills, I know a lot of people out there probably have PhotoPills. Let me know in the comments here if anyone, in the chat, do you have PhotoPills? Have you used it? Or is it completely new to you? If you don't have it, it's worth checking out. There are other apps that do similar things. The Photographer's Ephemeris, and there's another app called Planet, like Planit, not planet like the, like a planet in the sky. They all of them do very similar things. They're all kind of competing with each other. But PhotoPills is the first one that had Milky Way support years ago. So it's the one I've been using since then because it was the first one that had Milky Way support. So I just kept with it. I do use Planet once in a while. Because Planet has some other features in it that are really nice. That I'm not going to get into here because it's for other things. But the way... and like a whole PhotoPills training session would take forever. Like I said, go to photopills.com, go to their YouTube channel. If you really want it, I've got a premium training. But the basics are that in PhotoPills, you have this sort of 2D, what do you call it? Like, Google Maps view of the location. And I always use satellite view so I can actually see the terrain. And the screen will show you the red pin is where you want to be standing. So you want to put that where you want to stand to take your photo. And then when you're in Milky Way mode, which you have to turn on the right layers and turn off the other layers, but we're not going to get into all the details with that right now. there is the Milky Way shows up. And I'm going to go to the next slide here. And these little arrows kind of tell you what's what. So the dots going through the sky there, or the dots that are kind of making like a half circle, that is the arc of the Milky Way. That's trying to tell you this is where the Milky Way is arcing. The big, thick white line that's going kind of down and out the bottom right there, that's where the galactic core is on the horizon, or the azimuth of the galactic core. It's like the degrees, in the sky, where it is. That's where it'll be visible. It doesn't tell you how high it is, but it gives you an idea of where it is. The thin white line that's to the left of the big thick white line, that thin white line is where the Milky Way hits the horizon. So that's where it's going to come down and hit the bottom of the sky. And the gray thick white line, the thick gray line on the right there, that's where the galactic core rises, meaning where it'll be visible that night. So the Milky Way, depending on the time of year, it might be dark out. The Milky Way might be up a little bit, but maybe the galactic core isn't visible yet. Or maybe it's too late in the night and the galactic core has set. So, like I said, folks, please, maybe copy your comments for later. You may have to type them in later. I'll try to go back through some of this stuff, but there's a lot of stuff coming in, so you may have to retype them in when we get to the Q&A section. But I'm trying to get to a few things. As I see some things come up. Dark sites, yeah, that's a personal thing. I think, being safe on a dark site by yourself, that's a personal comfort level choice, I think. There are easy places, like go to the beach, pretty safe as long as you're not swimming in the water and you're aware of the tide. But going out to the top of Otter Cliffs in the winter when everything's icy, maybe not the safest idea. So it's a personal choice, right? I'm more worried about getting hurt by falling down than I am about wild animals or something like that. Let's see. Another note about PhotoPills, there is at the top of the screen you'll find information about just all kinds of different things: the sunrise, the moonrise, the Milky Way rise, blue hour, all that kind of stuff. And one of those screens has the galactic center, azimuth and elevation as of the current time on your little slider there, but it also has the Milky Way maximum elevation for that night. And that tells you, or maximum elevation, I think for where you are on the timeline. I'm sorry. So that you can scroll the timeline along and then go, okay, at this point, the Milky Way is arcing like this. How high in the sky is the highest point of the Milky Way? And you can see here it's 32.9 degrees as of that time of night, which actually is in twilight, so morning, sort of. And that's below that sort of 45-degree threshold I had mentioned earlier, which is, a loose rule of thumb. So I know just from the numbers, like, oh yeah, it should be fine. And the other thing you can look at, fine for a single row Milky Way panorama, like it'll all be visible in a single row. The other thing you can look at is all of the concentric the dots and the concentric circles. The farther away from the middle of the concentric circles that those dots are, the dots that make up the arc of the Milky Way in PhotoPills, the lower in the horizon it is. The closer they are to the middle of those concentric circles, the higher in the sky it is. So they try to give you an idea in two-dimensional phone space, of how the Milky Way is going to look. And they do it the best they can, right, by kind of giving you these circles and dots and stuff. So I hope that helps. It definitely takes some practice. Rick is saying that he finds PhotoPills difficult and Planet easy. I find Planet to be vastly more complicated than PhotoPills. It has way more features, way more buttons. I know how to use it, to some degree. I don't know what Sun Surveyor is. I've heard of it, though. But I find Planet to be way more complicated, I think. But that's just my take on it. But I do use it for other things because it has other features in it that nothing else has. It's the nice thing about Planet is that it actually has so full of features and has all kinds of things in it that don't exist in other apps. Like you can see where, like, kind of planning where the Milky Way core is going to be. You can plan where like a comet will be in that app, or like where the Orion Nebula or Orion Galaxy Orion constellation or the Orion Nebula will be, with that 2D map, and you can kind of plan where it'll be in the sky relative to your location on Earth. Not just a star app where you're like, oh yeah, there it's going to be. You actually want to know where it'll be relative to a foreground element or something like that without actually being there. Anyway, that's a whole side thing. But all right, so the other thing that a lot of these apps like PhotoPills have is something called Augmented Reality. That's where you would use your camera to see the live, like you're literally looking through your the video feed on your camera on your phone, and then overlays the Milky Way and the moon and the sun and whatever on top of that. So if you go out to a location where you want to shoot, this is a great scouting tool. You take out your PhotoPills, you calibrate the augmented reality, which is a whole other process that's laid out for you when you go into augmented reality. I should have the steps there, and you can look it up. But then you just put the camera in front of you, or you put your phone in front of you, and you can see roughly where the Milky Way is going to be. It's not 100% accurate, right? Take it with a grain of salt, and always, if it says it's going to be over your desired foreground object at 2 a.m., then show up at like 1:30 or something like that. Just give yourself plenty of time, not only to get set up, but in case it's wrong. Really, really handy tool. Most apps like PhotoPills have it. Really, really awesome when you're on location for doing this. You have to, one thing to make note, I'm not going to get all the details of PhotoPills, but you have to make sure that the red pin on the map is set to your current location and the current date and time, or at least the date and time that you want to shoot there. It doesn't have to be the current date and time, but you need the red pin to be at the current location. If you're standing in Maine and your red pin's in Utah, you're going to get the information about Utah for the Milky Way, even though it's showing you an overlay. It's actually based on the red pin. And then you can change the date to whenever you want it to be. So if you're standing somewhere in Acadia or whatever, and you're like, well, I'm too late for the Milky Way panoramas this year, but what's it like in, March of next year? You could shoot ahead to March or whatever, or you're in somewhere in the fall and you want to know what the Milky Way is like in the spring, whatever. So very, very handy. So like I said, there's lots of free training on PhotoPills on the PhotoPills website. Pardon me. I have they have a YouTube channel. I do have a premium training that's 2.5 hours long. That goes into a lot of details if you just happen to like the way that I teach. There's other apps with Milky Way planning, like Planet Pro that we talked about, and a photographer's ephemeris. And then there's Sunseeker or something, which I don't know much about, but I've heard of it. So stitching in software, we're going to just briefly talk a little bit about this. So, the calibration on that. So yeah, if you go out, by the way, and you're using augmented reality with PhotoPills, and you calibrate it, and you do the figure 8 thing, and then you look at the sun, and you move the icon over the sun to visually calibrate it, which it will make sense when you actually do it. And then you put it in your pocket and walk 10 feet, it may screw it all up, and you have to do the whole thing again. So be wary that when you're using augmented reality on your PhotoPills, you might want to check your visual calibration every single time you use it, even if you're only walked down the trail a little ways. But it can get thrown out to lunch real easily. And on some phones I've seen where it's just really bad, where it just is really off. So compare it to what it's actually saying on the 2D map. You should be able to see roughly on the 2D map, where you're standing with the red pin, and then where the foreground is that you want to put the Milky Way over. And if the augmented reality is way out to lunch compared to what the 2D map is saying, then something's off. And maybe you just don't have the time right or something, but maybe the compass is really screwed up in the phone. All right, so stitching. Stitching is the process of actually taking these separate images that you took to create the panorama and then merging them into the panorama. That's known as stitching. Many RAW editors have stitching abilities built in. Lightroom Classic, for example, is obviously a very popular RAW editor. I'm sure many people here use it. But it's terrible, in my experience, at night photography panoramas. It has a real problem with getting the blends to work right, with the colors and seamless blends, and the noise will look weird. And then it has stitching problems where you have a black hole, a few stars will turn into a black hole, and then there'll be the horizon won't stitch properly. All kinds of problems. Sometimes it works great. Like one of my multi-row panoramas came out perfect with PhotoPills, but most of the time, I mean with Lightroom Classic, but most of the time I find that Lightroom's stitching for panoramas, for night photography anyways, is really not very good. It's also very slow. Photoshop has better blending. It'll produce a better result, I find, than Lightroom. But it's not perfect. Can still have issues. But if that's the software you have, try those, right? Other RAW editors, ON1, PhotoRAW, Affinity Photo, Luminar, Capture One, all now have panorama stitching built in. So you can try it right there. Chances are any built-in panorama stitching to any RAW editor is going to be subpar compared to a dedicated program like PTGUI that's like designed just for panorama stitching. Just like focus stacking in Photoshop is usually not always as good as a dedicated focus stacking program like Helicon Focus or Z-Ring Stacker. It's gotten better in Photoshop for sure, but there's often times where you're going to need to use a dedicated tool for a really tough job. So PTGUI is dedicated panorama software. As far as I know, it's the best available. There's many advanced features in case you get into like really advanced panorama stuff. It does a much better job at stitching and warping and blending than like Lightroom and Photoshop do. Certainly far better than Lightroom. That's to say that you're going to have less trouble getting a perfect panorama out of PTGUI than maybe Lightroom. But it has a learning curve. Sometimes it's just as easy as pulling the photos into PTGUI and hitting a few buttons and you're done. Other times it takes more work to get the panorama to complete. But it's very good. It's very fast. I can sometimes get a panorama stitched together in PTGUI in longer than it would take to do it in Lightroom, even though I have to like export a bunch of images and kind of screw around with it in PTGUI a bit. It's just lightning quick. So it's something to consider. It's another expense, another piece of software, obviously. But if you're getting into panoramas and you're having trouble with Lightroom or Photoshop or whatever, PTGUI is probably the way to look, probably something to look into. So the general workflow for all this editing, so you've taken all your photos and you planned your shot, you got out taking your photos, now you got to figure out how to edit it all together. I generally prepare my raw files as I would do normally, which means that I would prepare them the way that I teach in my book and in my other videos, my Milky Way Masterclass videos. That goes over, noise reduction, which I don't really use, but like, getting rid of sharpening and color white balance and correcting lens distortion and all that stuff, right? It's kind of basic stuff. And then you probably would stitch to panorama. And in my case, if you're using Lightroom, it doesn't really matter which way you do this because it is kind of all raw in Lightroom. You can stitch and then kind of correct stuff. Although I think I found the issue where you need to get rid of your vignette removal before you stitch in Lightroom. Because if you do it afterwards, if you don't do it before, you end up with like these weird banding problems in your panorama. So it's probably a good idea to always try to remove distortion issues and lens vignetting issues as much as you can before stitching, regardless of the stitching software you're using. You can try different projections until you like what you see. When you get into panoramas, you'll see what I mean. There's like different projections for how the panorama is stitched together, and some look better than others depending on the scene. And then if you're doing exposure blending, like I mentioned earlier, then I would do this again. Like I'd have the sky panorama, the foreground panorama, all taken in the same place on the same night, this different exposure settings to get more light in the foreground shots. And I end up with two panoramas that I then have to blend together to make a single image. And then you have creative edits on top of all that, right? So actually make the image sing and come to life. So like I said, PTGUI, I don't have any association with PTGUI, but once I tried it like a couple years ago, I was like, holy crap, how come I haven't used this before? It just made life so much easier. It has better blending. It has masking to control which part of an image is used in the blend. This is really handy for like, let's say, I have PTGUI Pro, Marvin, if you're asking about PTGUI, if I have the Pro version. I don't know if you need it. It's just, I have it. But you want whatever version has masking in it. If you're going to get to really into problematic panoramas, you want masking. That may only be in the Pro version. I don't remember. But masking is basically like that image I showed you earlier, the Twilight image with the Milky Way here and the icy cliffs. I actually had lens fog that night, and on the center of every image that I took for the panorama, there'd be like a blurry spot in the image. And I was like, ah, man, this is going to be like a nightmare to stitch. And at the time, I didn't use PTGUI, so I had to do it all manually, and it was a pain in the butt. But if I was using PTGUI now, I would have stitched it together in PTGUI, and then you could go in and using the masking tool in PTGUI, tell it, like, I don't want to use this blurry, fogged up part of this image. Find another part from an adjacent image that doesn't have it blurred and use that instead. And it was great. Like, you know, through the masking tool in PTGUI, it was just awesome. It made it so much easier. A similar tool like that exists, I think, in Affinity Photo, if you're using that, but it doesn't exist in Lightroom or Photoshop. And it just made stitching so much easier. It's also, let's see, it has more, PTGUI again has more projection types are supported for more complicated panoramas. It's faster than Lightroom or Photoshop. It has advanced controls. When you get into really complicated panoramas that aren't stitching properly, you can manually try to align them with control points. Way over the, over the head of this webinar to get into that right now. Aligned to grid functionality for dealing with complex multi-row panos. And I actually have, we're not going to get into editing here, but I have a premium Milky Way panos video that demonstrates using PTGUI, and there's a little bit of Lightroom in there. But it goes like a half an hour of showing a little bit of Lightroom and then how to use PTGUI and the masking thing I was talking about with fixing some issues with, I think that image might be that image I just showed you with the fog problems in that image, like kind of dealing with some advanced stuff in there. Regardless of whatever you're using, if you're going to export your files out of Lightroom or whatever raw editor to some other program to stitch, you want to make sure you use the right settings for your export. This is where a lot of people get screwed up and they use the wrong settings. And then their panorama is only like this teeny weeny little thing. And you're like, I don't understand. And it usually is because they didn't export it at full size images. Like they exported like small JPEGs or something like that. Or they're resizing their TIFFs to something. So you can take a screenshot of this or write it down or whatever. But this might be shown in the book too. But you want to use a TIFF format. ProPhoto RGB color space, 16 bits for the highest quality, and no resizing. Don't resize. That's where people get tripped up, is they'll often have resizing on by accident or the wrong color space or something like that. But the highest quality results will be through this. So make a lot more sense once you're actually into this and doing stuff. So putting it all together, man, we've talked about an enormous amount of stuff here. And we'll get into Q&A in a second. But we've talked about everything from planning to doing a little bit of editing. So you've got PhotoPills or whatever to go out, plan your shot. Well, you can plan it from the comfort of your home. You can go out and shoot. Go out to your location and plan the week through the air or whatever. Obviously, you go out and shoot. Take your panorama, the most fun part, being out under the night sky, right? Preparing your raw images, stitching them, exposure blending if needed, and finally creative edits. It's a lot of stuff to put together. And like I said, we're not going to go into like a demo here, but I do have a Milky Way panorama stitching in PTGUI video that is actually part of a Milky Way panoramas video webinar like this one that was recorded a while ago as part of my premium membership I had back a couple of years ago with Patreon that some of you guys might have been in or not. But it's that recording that at the end of it has about half an hour of stitching and editing. Specifically in PTGUI. There's a little bit of Lightroom, but it goes into showing you how to use PTGUI, and the screenshot here is showing you kind of using the masking. So that's available as a sort of add-on to the masterclass, which the masterclass is my Milky Way masterclass that some of you have. And if you love it or hate it, you can tell everyone in the comments here. And it's not designed for panoramas, but it goes over, if you're going to do the other type of Milky Way photography that I do, where you're taking sky shots and foreground images and you're doing star stacking, and you want to get really deep into how to get low noise images without using lights or getting your foreground sharp and low noise sky and pinpoint stars. That's what the editing workflow module and the masterclass covers, and the exposure blending module covers how kind of putting advanced exposure blending techniques. Like I said, it does not cover panoramas specifically, but the creative edits used in there can be used in any type of night image. The masterclass contains the editing workflow module, which is a full start-to-finish walkthrough of my entire Milky Way workflow, including star stacking on Mac or Windows. So there's different programs for each, and it goes through those. Color balancing, white balancing, raw prep in Lightroom Classic, noise reduction, removing hot pixels, exposure blending, various creative editing techniques to really make the Milky Way pop. Example files are included, and it's like over 3 hours of training just for that module in the masterclass. The main module or the main image that's gone over there is this one here, and you can see on the left is the star stacking example, where you've got an image that's got the stars, but there's no usable foreground, it's just too dark because it's such a short exposure of 10 seconds. In the middle, you've got a foreground exposure. I think this one's probably 10 minutes. Unusable sky. So then you have to blend them together and do creative edits. And it walks you through everything I do to make this image that you see here. Like all the raw preps, star stacking, exposure blending, everything needed to make it happen. We also go through some more creative editing examples. Here you can see a quick before and after of left and right, where you can see before the editing, yeah, the Milky Way's there, but after just a few edits, you can really make the image sing and really get the Milky Way to pop and really jump out of the image. The exposure blending module in the masterclass includes teaching blending techniques specific in Photoshop. This is not designed for Affinity Photo or anything. You might be able to use some of the same techniques, but this is really tooled for Lightroom and Photoshop users. But you might be able to apply some of the same techniques. It goes through, layer masks for hand blending, like basic stuff, and it goes through really advanced blending with a select and mask tool to get really seamless blends, so you don't have like ugly halos around your trees and stuff like that. Focus stacking example with Helicon Focus for flowers. There's 6 examples. Raw files are included. That's a few hours long in itself. This is an example of the sky and foreground blend that's in one of the examples in the exposure blending module of the masterclass. You can see the sky. Again, good detail in the sky, completely unusable foreground because it's so dark. And the foreground exposure on the bottom there, it's like 10 minutes long, plenty of detail in the foreground, no like blown out sky. Blend them together and you come up with a final image that looks something like that, right? So it goes over how to do that without making the trees look all terrible. There's also an example of focus stacking with Helicon Focus, where I focus stacked this field of flowers and added that together with the sky image, all in the same night, same spot, didn't move the camera. Came up with a final image there. So they go over through the examples of focus stacking there. These are all 6 examples that are in that exposure blending module of the masterclass. So until the end of the webinar here, there's a special offer where you can get 50% off the entire masterclass plus 2 free bonuses. You'll get my PhotoPills bonus, my PhotoPills training video, which is $45 by itself for free thrown in, and the Milky Way Panoramas and PT GUI demo, like the Panoramas webinar that I recorded a while ago that has a lot of the same content in here, plus 30 minutes of PT GUI editing and whatnot, will be thrown in too for free. So that's a lot of training, like 8 hours or something like that. And all together, it's normally $287, but for the end, until the end of the webinar, you can get it for only $97. And I'm going to go over here. We're going to start QA in a moment. And the first bonus, like I mentioned, is my PhotoPills training video. Recorded webinar, 2.5 hours, detailed planning. Go over lots of stuff in PhotoPills. If you happen to like the way I trained, then, some people asked me specifically for this video. The second bonus is the, like I said, the Milky Way Panorama video that is basically a lot of the same content as this video, plus an extra 30 minutes of stitching and PT GUI, specifically, a little bit of Lightroom. So this is something you can download and watch anywhere. You don't have to be connected to the internet to watch it. Just like all my other videos you download and watch. They're not streaming online. You can download them, you can put them on a thumb drive, connect them to your TV, watch them on your television, whatever you want to do. So that you can, if anyone is interested in that, let me turn on the other screen here. You can go to adamwoodworth.com/offer to take advantage of that. And that's going to run until the end of the webinar. You'll get everything for $97, basically like a huge discount on everything. If you have the masterclass and you love it, let people know in the comments. If you're not sure if you have the masterclass, you can email me and I'll let you know. So that is running from now until the end of the webinar. We're going to jump into Q&A. And again, if you want to go to adamwoodworth.com/offer, you can take advantage of that. And okay, so I'm going to start to go through some of the Q&A here. If anyone has anything that I'm missing or that I'm going to, if I don't get to your question, please maybe retype it. David, if there's anything specific I should be covering, my lovely moderator, David, can let me know. Let's see. Thank you, everyone. Alan, Lonnie, Joe, thank you for your compliments on the masterclass. And thank you, everyone, for coming. Like, oh my God, this has been over an hour and a half. And thank you for joining me on this crazy journey through the night sky of Milky Way panoramas. So, oh my goodness, let me go through here. Actually, I'm going to take a second. I'm going to run the preview video. It's like a couple-minute video while I look through some of the chat here. I'm going to turn off my mic. This is just like a little teaser video to kind of show you what's in it. Hello, I'm Adam Woodworth, and I'm excited to announce a major update to my Milky Way Masterclass. This update includes an entirely new editing workflow demonstration covering my latest tools and techniques that I use to create Milky Way images with low noise and seamless natural-looking blends, as well as many creative editing techniques to really make your images pop. This class begins with the editing workflow demonstration, which covers every step in detail, starting with star stacking and Starry Landscape Stacker on Mac or Sequator on Windows, preparing separate foreground exposure raw files, easily removing hot pixels, focus stacking, exposure blending, and creative edits, including how to really make the Milky Way pop by using curves, dodging and burning, and reducing the size of the stars to bring out the nebulosity of the galactic core. We'll also cover how you can use star stacking with mirror-like reflections, and how you can use star stacking to avoid separate foreground exposures when the scene has a lot of ambient light. The workflow module also includes a demonstration of how I have incorporated Capture One into my editing workflow to easily remove most hot pixels from RAW files without the need for using in-camera long exposure noise reduction. After the workflow module, we would jump into an in-depth module on exposure blending. This comprehensive video series covers 6 different examples of blending separate night sky and foreground exposures to create a final result with low noise and sharp focus for the entire scene. We will cover basic blending with the gradient tool before jumping into using the Select and Mask panel to create accurate masks for very realistic blends that don't have seam lines or halos, as well as using selections to control manual blending for a tricky scene with trees blowing in the wind, a bright ambient light scene from a lighthouse, and an example of complex focus stacking using Helicon Focus, a dedicated focus stacking tool. This masterclass will teach you advanced editing and blending techniques for getting dramatic, realistic-looking results. Visit adamwoodworth.com to learn more and to purchase this class. Okay, folks, thanks for sitting through that. Let's see. So I'm going to start to try to go through Q&A here. Sue is asking, I was given a 1-year subscription to Masterclass for Christmas. Would your class... I don't know what that is, Sue. I don't have anything that's a subscription. I don't know what the Masterclass is that you're talking about, but I don't sell anything that's a subscription. It's just a one-time purchase. So the yeah, and actually I got some good news for you that own the masterclass already. I have an email ready to go to send to all of you current owners that bought it before this webinar started that will give you free access to the Milky Way Panoramas download. That's just as a nice little bonus for joining this webinar and purchasing my masterclass previously. So keep your eye out on that, and like definitely ping me via email if you don't see that coming your way. So someone was asking about keeping the lens warm. Yeah, I use a electric lens heater. I don't like hand warmers. They're like, too unreliable. I've had them like sometimes work, sometimes not work, and you just have to keep buying them. With an electric lens heater, you can buy it once and buy a battery or two and then just use it for years and years. Maybe you buy a couple lens heaters in case one breaks, but they're USB lens heaters that connect to a USB battery pack, available on like Amazon. I have a, if you go to my website and look at my blog, there's actually a post on that. It's actually in the book as well. So let's see. Seth K is asking, Seth K, is that Seth Cantor, Mr. Seth from New Jersey? Do you need a Nodal Rail if there is nothing close to the camera in the foreground? Probably not. I've certainly taken panoramas where I didn't use a Nodal Rail and it came out fine. It's going to depend on the stitching software and how complex the scene is. If there's nothing like really, if there's not much in the foreground, you may be able to get away without a Nodal Rail, no problem at all. Because I've certainly used to use panoramas for daytime panoramas long before I even knew about Nodal Rails, and that all worked okay. But it just depends on what the scene is and what's in the scene. Since I'm using a rotator, it's not that much of a pain in the ass to just add my Nodal Rail to the bag as well and kind of set it all up. I find the rotator to be like the most important for me. It just makes it so much easier. Yeah, I hope everyone liked it. Like I said, if you purchased the masterclass that was released in, I think it was December or late December or something of 2020, that's the new masterclass. If you own that, you will get an email after this webinar that'll give you a link to download the PhotoPills. Not the PhotoPills. I'm sorry. The Panoramas one. The PhotoPills is, I can give you a discount to get it really cheap, but to get the Panoramas recorded webinar that has the PT GUI editing in it, that'll come to you if you're if you have the masterclass that was released in very late 2020. If you own the masterclass that was released before then, you'll have to upgrade to this masterclass to get everything, because there's been a huge change in the editing module. The exposure blending module hasn't changed, but the editing module itself is worth $97, I think, just by itself. The normal price for the masterclass without any of the extra bells and whistles is $197. You add all this stuff together, it was at like $285 or $287 for everything. And so it's only $97 until the end of the webinar. But if you have any questions, don't worry. David Huffstadter says, PayPal fraud division called me when you bought the masterclass. Well, you're actually paying through my Cayman Islands account when you buy it. I have no idea why PayPal fraud contacted you. That's very strange. It's the first time I've heard of that. Ross, thank you for purchasing. I look forward to you. I hope you enjoy it when you get through it. Let me go through some things. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Ken Small. Thank you, Paul Freeman. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Ross. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you, Corrine. Thank you, Gregory. Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Patrick. Brad. All new members of the Masterclass Elite, I guess you could say. Craig. Luann, looks like you have a question that might be related to something I hopefully answered with the free bonus there. I'll get back to you in email later. Patricia, thank you, Patricia. Welcome to the Masterclass Elite, I guess. I don't know, whatever you want to call it. Richard, Eric, Glenn. I'm trying to read the names between all these like different. Brian, thanks, Brian. Hey, Brian Alford. Do I know you from a workshop? All right, Cami or Cami. David, obviously with the PayPal fraud. Thank you. Kenneth. Thank you, everybody. Holy moly, for joining the masterclass. I hope you get some use out of it. Gerald. Yeah. And then feel free to please, email me. If you're, have my book or my videos and you're like having trouble, you need some answers. No problem. Just shoot me an email. If I'm on the road or something teaching or taking pictures or whatever, it may take me a little while to get back to you, but I always get back to everyone who, if they're a customer at least, certainly. And if you have problems downloading it or purchasing it, I will get back to you as soon as possible. I try to prioritize, any video, any problem like that. Hey, Birdie. Got one of the kitties showed up. And let's see, Lance, the masterclass is accessible lifetime. Yeah, so everything is downloadable. So you purchase it. Once you purchase it, you're immediately given a screen that has all the download links, and you're emailed all the download links. If you don't see the email, check your spam folder. But you can download everything and keep it forever. If you lose the files, your computer crashes, whatever, you can always try to find that email and download them again. If you can't find them, just email me. This happens all the time. Someone's computer crashes or they misplaced the files or whatever it is, and I'll get you back the links for that, right? I just need to have the email that you used to purchase, so you got to remember that. If I can't find you in a system, I can't prove that you purchased it, right? So remember the email you used to purchase it. Sometimes I can find you just by your name if it was maybe a different email, but... Thank you, Chancy Pants 08. My book is beautiful and amazing. I like that name, Chancy Pants. And Joe's asking if I'm a speaker at the Night Photo Summit. Yes, I'm a speaker at the Night Photo Summit that's coming up in just a few weeks in February. I'm speaking on Friday now. They changed my time. Just literally right as this webinar was about to begin, they changed my time from Saturday to Friday. But that's my Milky Way crash course, and it's all the same information in the book, but the Night Photo Summit is going to have so much more going on. Like Art Wolf is speaking, for crying out loud, and Royce Bear and all kinds of people. And so I can try to get through some of the questions here. Someone asked me about if I would use a prime, like a 14mm prime, over a zoom lens. So the thing about primes is that my 14 to 24 zoom, like the Nikon, it's really good, even at wide open at 14 millimeters, and all the other focal lengths is pretty good, and it's more flexible. A prime lens, yeah, you could get a separate prime lens and use it, but I would rather have the zoom if it's as good as the Nikon one. Some zooms aren't, have issues. Some, like I think the Tamron 15 to 30 has lens flare issues. I've seen people complain about lens flare issues with the Tamron. But not that the Nikon wouldn't have lens flare issues, but it's supposed to be more aggressive in like the Tamron, for example, right? Let me just see here. Menace, would you envision a situation in which you would use a zoom lens for panorama? So I do use a zoom lens. It's just zoomed all the way out. I'm not sure if you mean would I zoom in, like to a longer focal length. It depends what you want to capture. I'm usually trying to capture just tons of sky and the whole arc of the Milky Way, so zoomed out at 14 is where I'm usually at for that. Luann, which tripod do you recommend for panos? What is the best L bracket you recommend? When blending sky and foreground panos that are single row, do you take each frame and change settings? Okay, so number one, I use a Really Right Stuff tripod. They're USA made. They're really high quality. They're really expensive. They're really expensive stuff. But before that, I had Gitzo's. Gitzo is also good. And then nowadays, there's like a billion other brands like Three-Legged Thing, Fisol, Benro, so many other brands that are making carbon fiber tripods that are pretty good. I don't have any experience with them personally. But I know plenty of people out there using like sort of the cheaper ones. They're only a few $100s as opposed to like $1,000 or $800 or whatever, that are happy with them. But I don't have any personal experience with them. But if you can afford really right stuff, I mean, it's really good stuff. Or right stuff. What's the best L bracket? So I use L brackets from Really Right Stuff or Kirk usually. Just whatever fits the camera. There's usually not many available from different brands that fit the camera. I try to avoid like the really cheap ones like Sunway Photo or something, although I've had pretty good luck with some of those. But the ones that are like machined perfectly to the camera they're like aircraft aluminum from like Really Right Stuff or Kirk are like really top notch. And they're not as likely to kind of like swivel and get chewed up in your tripod head. And number 3, when blending sky and foreground panos that are single row, do you take each frame and change settings? So I would do a pano start to finish of the sky, like just sky settings, like 20 seconds, 14 millimeters, f2.8, ISO 6400 or whatever. And then I would do the same pano, but with a longer shutter speed, lower ISO. So you'd probably plug in an intervalometer if you needed to use a longer than 30-second shutter speed. Maybe ISO 1600, whatever it is, it's going to vary depending on your scene. So I don't like take a 20-second shot and then take a 1-minute shot and then take a 20-second shot and take a 1-minute shot or 2-minute shot or whatever. That would like cause the stitching to be way off because you'd be way too much time between each shot. So you want to do your 20 or whatever second shots they are pretty close together. But that said, like you could do a 30-second shot with a 30 seconds of exposure, what's it called? In-camera noise reduction, long exposure noise reduction. So like a minute between each shot and you'd still be fine. It would still stitch just fine. If you started getting into like star stacking or tracking and you're doing like a minute or 5 minutes and you're trying to stitch, I don't know how well that's going to work because you could have minutes between each shot. Maybe it'll be okay. I'm not sure. Let's see. Trying to go back through some more Q&A, folks. Bear with me. Thank you everyone again for coming. We've got 11 minutes left on the special offer, so I'll be here answering questions for another 11 minutes. Okay, Marvin. Sorry, I didn't get to you until just now, Marvin. I upgraded my Milky Way Masterclass on December 6, 2020. So that was the date I released the new one. So you have the new one, and you'll be getting an email after this class is over with a link to download the Milky Way Panoramas webinar from a little while ago that has the PT GUI stuff in it. If you don't receive that tonight, send me a message tomorrow. My apologies, folks. I'm just trying to kind of get through stuff here. Do you do multi-row panos horizontally left to right for a row, then raise camera for next row, or vertically for each column, and then left to right? So Stephen's asking, you do row, 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 or do column, column, column? I usually do, I think I've actually tried both. And they both work. You do need to keep in mind, though, if you're doing like a row or a column. I guess I'm trying to think through this in my head live while we're on the call here, but if you do a row and then a row, like by the time you get from the first image in that row to like the last image in the next row, there's going to be a lot of time elapsed between them. So it might be harder to stitch. Stars move more, but it actually worked the time I did it. If you do it column to column, then there's probably going to be, less time between each column because there's only like a few images up as opposed to like 10 images across. So that might stitch better, but I've done it both ways. Thank you, Lonnie. Best money you can spend in Milky Way training. I appreciate that. I'm glad to see people enjoy the training. Chancy Pants. Oh, hopefully that answered your question. You'll get the PT GUI stuff free. Just as a nice thank you. Let's see. My Gitzo has held up superbly. Yes, Gitzos. I used to use Gitzos. They're pretty similar to like Really Write Stuff. Art size. I haven't heard of those tripods. 500 rule. I do not use the 500 rule, Bob. It's a little outdated. If you wanted to use a division rule, you could use like 300 or something like that. But really, if you have PhotoPills or any app like that, there's a tool in it that can calculate a ideal shutter speed for a focal length. But, you just test it out, take a 20-second shot with whatever focal length and like kind of zoom in on the result in your preview. And do you like the result? Is it too traily? Patrick. Oh, thanks, Patrick. Yeah, check. Maybe send me an email. Make sure. Yeah, if they were dated 2018, they're definitely old. But you can always send me an email, and maybe there was another purchase you made, and you just never downloaded them or something. My masterclass, Lance is asking, is your masterclass also available or taught at the virtual summit? If you're talking about the night photo summit that the National Parks at Night is putting on, no, that's a crash course that I'll be teaching. That's basically like everything you need to know to get into Milky Way photography, not including panoramas, like star stacking and stuff like that, though. But the editing part, like the videos, just to be really clear, the videos are only about the editing. They talk a little bit about what you need to do for star stacking in the field and stuff like that, but the videos are about editing. The book covers how to shoot and gear and stuff like that, and then the videos cover how to edit. There's a chapter on editing in the book, but it's a book. There's only one chapter on it. You can't get into detail like you do in a video. So the videos are how to edit, and they go into really good detail on how to edit. Let's see. Okay, let's see. Oh yeah, so Patrick's asking, do I stitch all the frames before final processing for contrast brightness? Yes, I do the panorama stitching first, and I do basic edits like white balance, vignette, and lens correction, stuff like that. Maybe sharpening or removing sharpening. But I'll usually save like noise reduction until later, maybe a little bit before. But I don't do any creative edits until after the blending, after the stitching is done. And if you're doing exposure blending, I don't do it until after I've done the stitching and the exposure blending. Man, there's a lot of new tripod companies. Geekoto, I've never heard of that. So many different tripod companies now. Ken, thank you, Ken. Glad you appreciated the webinar. Yeah, again, thanks everyone for coming. We've got another 5.5 minutes. Wow, time flies when you're having fun. Hey, Maggie, the other kitty showed up. Hi. Yeah, hi. So yeah, anyone have any more questions? Feel free to paste them in. The replay link for this is the same link you used to get here in the first place. And I'll also be emailing everyone who is on the mailing list for this webinar. You'll get an email just to remind you of the link. Dorothy Baxter, you have to go to adamwoodworth.com/offer to find the offer. It's not listed anywhere else on the website. It's a special secret link. adamwoodworth.com/offer, OFFER. Yeah, I guess I could have made that more obvious in the in the slides here. Live and learn. Yeah, if anyone has any more questions, thanks, Luann. Hope you had a good time here. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Pat, always good to see you. It's too bad this wasn't a Zoom meeting and I could see your TIE Fighter background or whatever it is that you would use. Some Star Wars cockpit background. I always enjoy seeing that. If anyone has any questions, I'm sure there's probably questions I haven't gotten to. So if anyone has any questions you'd still like answered, please feel free to post them into the chat here. Let's see. And again, if you want to take advantage of it, it's adamwoodworth.com/offer. I'm sorry that might not have been as obvious as it could have been. Oh, I meant to type in a link here like half an hour ago. Oh, well. I don't know. Does that link work? Of course not. So let me try again. Maybe that works. Whatever. Next time. Any light filling painting comments? So I don't use lighting other than the ambient light. But Royce Baer is a guy who is really into that. And I think he pioneered like low-level lighting. And he's talking at the Night Photo Summit. Which, hold on a second. If you're interested in the Night Photo Summit, you can sign up here. It is, like a little pricey, I guess, $3.99, I think. But you get access to like 3 days of training, and you get to, I think it's a year access to all the online copies to watch forever for a year. You get to pick the talks you want to join that are live. You can re-watch the recorded ones that you couldn't get to later. And Art Wolf's talking. Royce Baer's talking. Michael Fry is talking. Mike Mesuel, the second or third. I can't remember the last part of his name. And if anyone's interested in the book, let's see if this works. I appreciate everyone that buys the book. I don't make a penny when it sells, but I am glad that people are enjoying it. Books are kind of funny. You get an advance when a publisher approaches you to write a book. You get an advance, which means they pay you basically your royalties ahead of time before it's published or when it's published. But you don't get paid again ever until it sells like a whole bunch of copies and they make a second edition, which is like highly unlikely for these sort of small market that we're in. But I really appreciate everyone who enjoys the book. I put a absolutely enormous amount of effort into it, and I really hope it worked out. Thanks, Seth. Yeah, thanks for coming, man. Maybe we'll see you again at some other workshop somewhere one day, or at the expo one day. If I ever down there again. Let's see, Kathy, I noticed you didn't use a leveling base on your tripod. No, I don't use a leveling base. I just use the ball head as the leveling base, basically. This week, someone purchased a UV mineral flashlight from me. He said he saw one of your YouTube videos where you mentioned it. Oh, Pat, that must have been my Milky Way crash course video that's on YouTube. That's the only place where I mentioned it. That's pretty cool. Yeah, so everyone, Milky Way season in the Northern Hemisphere starts up next month, but it's like really early, like 4 a.m. or whatever, and it's only visible for like a little while. But it is starting. Maybe March will be a little better, but it's also, if you're up my neck of the woods, it's going to be really cold. But yeah, get your panoramas figured out and practice, because it's going to be Milky Way panorama season very, very soon. For those of you down south in the Southern Hemisphere, you're probably already into it. I think Milky Way season is like almost all year down south. So like, again, just a few seconds left, but you can still make it to the website to get the offer if you're interested. adamwoodworth.com/offer. The Night Photo Summit, the link is there, npsummit.live/Adam. And that'll get you access to the entire Night Photo Summit, not just my presentation. The book is at adamwoodworth.com/book. That'll get you the link to where you need to go. And like I said, I recommend the paperback copy, not because it costs more, because like I said, I don't make a penny when anything sells, but it looks way better. It looks way, way better than the ebook, and I'm really impressed with the way they laid it out. And I know that thing says expired, but you can still go there and get the offer until the time I actually like shut this webinar off. Thank you from a fellow Maynard. Do you ever do in-person workshops or shoots? Sometimes I do. I did 4 or 5 workshops last year, and here in Maine, and I'm not sure what I'm doing yet for this year. But if you're on the mailing list, stay on the mailing list. That's where you'll find out. It's always announced to the mailing list first. Ross, can't wait to play with your ball head. Sounds like a good time. Ball head and panel gear. It's always a good time. So here we are, folks. It is 9:05 here on the East Coast. I need to go eat dinner. My birthday was just a few days ago, and we have just a couple slices of cake left, too, so I'll get to have some cake as well. And I guess have a sugar high and stay up all night long. Yeah, whatever. Anyway, thank you, everyone, for coming. The video link that you used to get here is the same link you can use to rewatch it immediately after it's over if you want to watch it again. The offers, if you want to take advantage of it before I shut this down, adamwoodworth.com/offer. The book is adamwoodworth.com/book. npsummit.com/live is where the night photo summit is for the National Parks at Night guys. Maybe I'll see you at some of those. And for those of you who own the masterclass purchased December 6, 2020 or later, keep your eye out on your email. You will get a free download for the Milky Way Panoramas class with the PT GUI demo in it. So I hope you all have a good night. Josh saw me at the Down East Astronomers. Oh, cool, man. You must be the guy from Canada that has the Canadian, the maple leaf. So I remember a guy from New Brunswick was at one of the meetups, I think. Dorothy finally got there. Oh, thank you, Dorothy. I'm sorry that that was difficult. Maybe next time I'll remember to actually type the link into the chat. Oops. But anyways, thanks everybody. Thank you for coming. I hope you enjoyed it. Go out there, get some clear skies, stay safe, avoid the bears. There's no bears around here anyway. Just black bears, and they're always scared. No, not Canadian. All right. Well, I don't know. But yeah, I remember that webinar with the Astro Group. And have fun photographing out there, everybody. Clear skies to you all. And I'm going to try to end the stream, and hopefully this works properly. I will see you all in email, maybe in person. Have a good day. Don't hesitate to email me if you have any questions. Take it easy. Good night, everyone.